what does this mean for, I guess, America's hegemony, the future of Europe, and yeah, the role of NATO?
If I were the Europeans right now, I would go back and pick up that Russian draft treaty that they provided on December 17th, 2021 to NATO, and I'd blow the dust off of it, and I'd put it on the table, and I'd ask the United States to come to the table with their copy, and I'd turn to the Russians and say, "We're ready to talk." Make the Russians react to you. All right? Make the Russian begin the dialogue now. Why? Because the more responsibility you show towards having a conducive approach towards bettering genuine European security framework, the more Russia will not be paranoid about, your intent on Ukraine. Let Russia win in Ukraine. They've won. Accept it. What you need to do now is save NATO if that's what you want to do. And the only way to save NATO now is to sit down and talk with the Russians about a European security framework that allows an empowered Russia to peacefully coexist with a weakened but still robust NATO. There will be a gray zone. There will be part of NATO. There's people out there who have misconstrued what rollback to 1997 means. It doesn't mean that Poland, the Baltic states stop being NATO. Russia's never said that they have to leave NATO. What Russia says, though, is that the military infrastructure that has been pushed east since 1997, that has to come back. For instance, the ballistic missile sites in Poland and Romania, they have to go. Massive NATO bases, they have to go. That the Eastern European nations will be NATO nations protected by Article 5, but they won't be bases from which NATO can project power against Russia. This is what needs to happen if you want to create a security framework. And instantly the savings, I mean, it's amazing if you did this, how much savings Europe would have. Because now you're talking about a completely different military, enterprise. You're not talking about building up the world's largest, 800,000 man force to fight the Russians. You're talking about normal security structures that protect the integrity of Europe in a sustainable fashion and if you play your cards right, that keeps the United States linked in a transatlantic relationship. That's your backup. The United States doesn't, the connectivity between the United States and NATO is just deep. And we don't necessarily want to leave. We just don't want to be involved in a shooting war with Russia where NATO calls the shots. We will never be subordinated to NATO. But if NATO is smart, they'd make sure that they'd be able to have a realistic European security framework backed by the military might of the United States. That's their security guarantee. That could lead to, genuine, geopolitical stability that could serve as the basis for an economic revival. I mean, this is Europe's chance, but you gotta start by respecting the fact that Russia exists and Russia exists with, spheres of interest and influence. It's just a reality. You can't continue to talk about NATO having spheres of interest and influence and Russia having none. The fact is both have spheres of it, and there will be areas where these spheres, overlap. And in there, you need to come up with and if you look at this 28-point peace plan and the vision of the Trump administration, there is talk about this. There is talk about how to, work with Poland, to deal with the reality of, Poland being right there on the border. How do you make sure Russia doesn't view Poland as a threat while still protecting Poland? These are some of the topics that need to be discussed. How do you make the Baltics feel safe without, making the Russians say, "Hey, you're just a hop, skip, and a jump away from St. Petersburg," or you keep threatening to cut off Kaliningrad, or you keep threatening that the Baltic is a NATO lake. You've got to find a way, got to find a balance there. It can be done, but it's going to require Europe to just fundamentally change, its direction, and it's going to require new leadership because the old political and economic elites that empowered themselves with the notion of this constant Russian threat that justified, because NATO expansion and EU posturing are hand in glove. When we speak of independent European Union foreign policy, it's really independent foreign policy in terms of casting Europe as a counter to Russia. That's old thinking. It failed. It failed fatally in Ukraine. Europe has a chance to salvage itself, because otherwise, if they don't, Russia's going to get what they want anyways. Because NATO will collapse, EU will collapse, and that's it.
That's one of the greatest challenges, I think, of overcoming this post-Cold War, the hegemonic order for Europe, because you don't have to worry about the security competition under hegemon, because by definition you don't have to care about what other centers of power think. But this idea that we only have to deter the Russians, that what you refer to is reducing then the security competition. Again, how do the Baltic states, how can they feel safe without us threatening the Russians? This required this shift from the hegemonic mindset to recognizing the security competition. I think it's a bit sophisticated thinking that our current leadership could struggle with. But again, they see the Ukraine war and territory as being the cause of this. But again, the Ukraine war is a symptom, a consequence of this broken Europe. And the territorial dispute is, again, a consequence of the unwillingness to manage this buffer zone. But